Hi, it's Digby here. Hope you're doing well. Welcome back to Dig Deeper. A couple of weeks ago, I was working with a group of executives and senior leaders from one of New Zealand's local government agencies. And as most organisations are at the moment, they're facing a whole lot of change and uncertainty. And we were talking about the challenges of that. And I asked them a question early on. I said, what do you find hardest about leading in uncertainty right now? And they said, almost without exception, we find it really hard to give people certainty. And almost without thinking, I responded by saying, don't try to give them certainty, give them agency instead. And that language, those ideas have been sitting with me kind of ever since. And I wanted just to talk about why I think this is really important. So because when things get uncertain, I reckon most leaders default into one of two modes. The first mode is what I call heroing. You've heard me talk about this if you've followed me for a while. This idea that you act like you've got the answers, or you're at least performing like you're trying to get them. And you don't actually hand anyone else the wheel, the responsibility for coming up with stuff. And this works maybe for a while. It might feel decisive. But the moment that you're not around, you're not in the room, it all can fall over because none of it was actually owned by anyone else. It all stayed with you. So that's heroing. And the other mode is hoping. This is where there's no answers and nothing's handed over either. All just quietly hoping it's either all going to go away or someone will step in to save us. It's a bit more of a quiet mode. It doesn't really look like failure the way that heroing does when it collapses, but it leaves people just as stuck, and maybe more so because there's not even the illusion of someone steering the ship. So I reckon there's another mode, the third mode, and this one is what I call hosting. And hosting isn't really about whether you've got the answer or not. It's about whether you're creating real room for other people to find their own answers. Sometimes you might know where you're heading and you host by still handing over the real say in how people get there. And sometimes you genuinely don't know and you host anyway. And that second one, I reckon, is the sweet spot, which this whole idea is really about. It's a little bit like sailing, I reckon, sailing a boat. You know, you can go out into the ocean, you might be charting a course, but you don't really know what's going to happen minute to minute. And a good skipper will hand the crew the ropes. They'll hand the crew the responsibility for figuring it out together. And yep, the skipper's playing a role. They're not passive, but they're not trying to control everything. And I really like that as a metaphor. If you are a visual person like me, I've created a model that explains these three modes and how they help or hinder in leading through uncertainty. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes so you can check that out. But overall, this idea, I reckon, is that certainty is a promise that you can't keep, whereas agency, on the other hand, is a gift you can always give. Now, there's some real research behind this too, which I find kind of reassuring. So it comes from self-determination theory, and this names autonomy as one of our core psychological needs. There's this sense that what you're doing is actually yours, not something that's being done to you. And there's this old nursing home study from the 70s where there was a group of residents who were given real choices. They like picking their own plant or choosing when to watch a movie. And they had this other group, this control group, that had everything decided for them. And 18 months later after the study, the choice group, the one who had a few small choices, they were happier, they were more active, and their mortality rate was half that of the other group, which to me says that agency isn't just a nice leadership idea, it actually does something real. And to be honest, I don't think this is that easy for me even. Like I've been a facilitator and coach for, years, 15 plus years, probably more to be honest. And I still feel that tension. Someone's wrestling with something hard and a part of me wants to make it easier for them and to hand them an answer and to reassure them. And I've got to remind myself again and again that it's not mine to solve. My job's to sit with their discomfort, but not to take it off them. And if you're someone who defaults to certainty under pressure, I don't think that makes you lazy or up yourself or anything like that. There's some real forces that are pushing you that way. Boards want confidence. Media wants sound bites. Most performance systems punish, either knowingly or not, anyone who says, I don't know. And in a lot of Kiwi and Aussie workplaces, admitting uncertainty still gets translated as being weak rather than honest. So choosing agency over certainty, it's not really just a mindset shift. I reckon it's a bit of a swim against the current of the culture. And I think that takes real courage. And what helps, I reckon, is having a small circle of people who will actually tell you the truth, not people who will just reassure you. Also, just having enough clarity about your own values that the pressure to perform has less grip on you. And I also think just practicing honesty in those small everyday moments, like those moments of courage, that you can just build up your courage muscle so it's ready when a real crisis hits. I reckon there's some other practical tips that could be useful here too, things you can actually do and say with your people. And I've created a little downloadable one-pager with a bunch of tips on it, and I'll put those in the show notes as well. But let me just read you those now, because I think they might be useful just to hear in your commute or wherever you are right now. So 3 sort of sets of practical tips to give people agency rather than certainty. The first one is to ask some good diagnostic questions, like, where are we right now on certainty? Are we at a high, medium, low? And maybe just asking people those questions involves them, includes them, and that's starting the agency journey. You can also ask, where are we right now on agency, high, medium, or low? So how much do we feel like we've got some choice in what happens next? And then if you think about that as a 2x2, which is the model that you'll get with the downloadable toolkit, where are we hoping, heroing, or hosting? And then you might just want to ask yourself a diagnostic question for you, which is, what's one thing I could do this week to move us out of heroing or hoping and into hosting? Might be one you could ask your team as well. So asking good questions is the first set of practical things you can do. The second set is all about tips for doing an agency audit. So you could ask these questions of your people. What decision could I hand to you this week that I'm currently making for you? Or what's one thing you like to experiment with, even if it might not work? Or maybe you could ask, where do you feel like you're just waiting for me to tell you what to do? I think that's a really good one. And if I disappeared for a week, what would you decide on your own that you're not deciding now? Real invitation for agency there. Third set of tips is around shifting your language. So instead of saying, trust me, it'll be fine, you might try, you've got more say in this than you think. Let's figure out what happens together. Or maybe instead of saying, here's the plan, you could try instead, here's the intent, you decide the path. Or you could say, instead of, I'll let you know when I know more, I hear that one a lot, you could try instead, here's what's within your control right now, really pointing out the agency. So those tips, as I mentioned, they're in a downloadable toolkit. You can just grab them in the show notes. Hope they're helpful. Let's wrap this up. So I think the hero is the person or the mode that is about performing certainty, whereas the host instead creates the conditions for agency. And lasting impact happens when people own their part, not just because a leader promised it would work. It reminds me a little bit of the Antoine Saint-Exupéry quote, if you want to build a ship, don't divide up the men to go and gather wood. Have them yearn for the vast and endless sea. And there's something about getting underneath into the heart, not just in the telling people what to do and what's going to happen next. That's the spirit of that quote. So I want to leave you with this. What's one decision you're currently making for your people that you could hand over instead? This is Dig Deeper. I'm Digby Scott. Until next time, go well.